Jasmine Thompson gripped the steering wheel tightly, her pulse quickening as the flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She'd been driving home from a late shift at the community center, earbuds tucked in her pocket, music fading from the car stereo, when the sudden blare of the police siren shattered the quiet night. The road was empty, the streetlights casting long, flickering shadows across her windshield, and yet the sense of foreboding hit her instantly. She eased the car to the shoulder, hands visible, rehearsing her words mentally, but the tension in her chest wouldn't release. Officer Rick Holloway approached her driver's side window first, his face set in a hard scowl, the reflection of the squad car's lights glinting off his badge. "License and registration," he barked, though his eyes darted over Jasmine with a weight that wasn't concern, it was judgment. Her heart sank as another officer, Brian Keller, stepped forward, arms crossed, sneering slightly, and Jasmine realized immediately that this wasn't just a routine stop, it was something else entirely. She swallowed, keeping her voice calm, polite, and careful. "Of course, officers," she said, fishing for her wallet. The tension in the air was palpable, a quiet storm before the inevitable clash. Holloway leaned closer, his tone sharpened with suspicion. "Do you know why we stopped you?" Jasmine shook her head, forcing a smile she didn't feel, and her fingers tapped nervously against her steering wheel. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flicker of the overhead lights. Then Keller, unable to hide his disdain, muttered under his breath just loud enough for Holloway to hear. "Just another girl thinking she can get away with something." Jasmine's chest tightened. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to not escalate, yet deep inside, a simmering question rose. What would happen if these men didn't see her for who she truly was? Jasmine handed over her license and registration, her hands steady but her mind racing. Officer Holloway took them slowly, his eyes scanning her car with a level of scrutiny that felt invasive, almost accusatory. The night air was thick with the faint scent of gasoline from passing cars and the distant smell of rain-soaked asphalt. Brian Keller leaned against the front of the squad car, muttering comments Jasmine could barely catch, but that carried enough malice to make her chest tighten. "So, what brings you out this late, huh?" Holloway asked, his voice dripping with suspicion, as if merely being black in this neighborhood made her guilty by default. Jasmine met his gaze calmly, refusing to let the rising fear show. "Just getting home from work, officer," she replied evenly, careful with every word. But her explanation didn't seem to satisfy him. Keller chuckled softly, a low, sarcastic sound that set Jasmine's teeth on edge. "Funny how it's always just work, huh? Always the story." She forced a smile, though her stomach twisted. Inside her, a storm was building, a mix of frustration, anxiety, and that instinctive, ever-present awareness of danger. Jasmine's father, Chief Daniel Thompson, had always warned her about these moments, teaching her to stay composed, to never give a reason for officers to escalate. She repeated his words silently in her head, a mantra against the rising panic. Holloway leaned closer to the window, the glare of the squad car lights reflecting in his eyes like a predator sizing up prey. "Step out of the car," he ordered abruptly. Jasmine froze, her mind racing. This was the part she had dreaded, where ordinary suspicion could turn into something much darker. She obeyed immediately, hands raised as she stepped onto the wet asphalt, feeling the cold seep through her shoes. Keller snickered from the side, but Jasmine refused to acknowledge it. Her calm exterior masked the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had to survive this encounter without giving them an excuse. And yet, the nagging fear in her gut told her that tonight would not be ordinary. The officers' eyes flicked between each other as if weighing their next move, and Jasmine, for the first time, sensed the tension wasn't just about the stop, it was about testing boundaries, power, and control, and she was right in the middle of it. Jasmine felt the chill of the night air bite through her jacket as she stood beside her car, hands raised and heart hammering. Officer Holloway circled the vehicle, flashlight in hand, probing the interior as though searching for something incriminating. Every movement felt deliberate, every glance loaded with judgment. Keller leaned casually against the hood, but the smirk on his face made it clear he was enjoying the intimidation. "So you live around here?" Holloway asked, his voice deceptively casual. Jasmine nodded, careful not to offer too much information. Yes, officer, just a few blocks from here. Her words were calm, almost serene, but inside a storm of nerves churned. The flashlight beam caught her face, highlighting the tension in her jaw and the slight tremor in her fingers. Holloway's eyes narrowed. You drive alone often? Late at night? Jasmine's pulse quickened. Each question seemed routine, but the tone, predatory, testing, accusatory, made it clear this was about more than traffic enforcement. Keller chuckled, muttering under his breath, "Look at her, thinking she's untouchable." Jasmine's teeth clenched, but she refused to rise to the bait. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "Stay calm. Composure is your shield." She repeated it silently, grounding herself in the mantra. Yes, officer, I drive alone, she said evenly. Holloway's eyes flicked back toward Keller, and in that brief glance, Jasmine sensed complicity, an unspoken agreement to assert dominance, to intimidate, to remind her of their power. The tension stretched, thick as the humid night air, broken only by the occasional distant wail of a siren or the hum of a passing car. Then Holloway's tone shifted, sharp and clipped. Step back from the car. Jasmine obeyed immediately, stepping a few feet away, her hands still raised, eyes forward. Keller let out a low whistle, smirking. Jasmine felt every muscle in her body tense, bracing for what felt like inevitable confrontation. Her thoughts raced. This can't escalate. Stay calm, stay calm. And then, in that moment, her worst fear intersected with the impossible. Her identity, hidden until now, was about to collide with the authority these men had underestimated, and everything they assumed about her was about to shatter. Holloway circled back to Jasmine, his flashlight slicing through the darkness like a blade, making her flinch even as she tried to maintain control over her breathing. Keller stayed behind, leaning lazily against the squad car, but his smirk betrayed his anticipation, like a predator enjoying the hunt. Jasmine's mind raced, every instinct screaming caution, every muscle ready to react if things went wrong. "I need you to open your trunk," Holloway demanded, his tone sharp, leaving no room for negotiation. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she obeyed, pressing the button on her key fob and watching the trunk click open. The beam of Holloway's flashlight illuminated the empty space inside, the echo of the metallic click resonating in the silent night. Keller whistled softly. "Nice car. Too bad it's late for you." Jasmine's heart lurched, anger and fear intertwining. She forced herself to remain still, refusing to react in a way that would give them an excuse. Holloway crouched slightly, peering into the trunk with exaggerated care. "Everything seems normal," he muttered, though the sarcasm in his voice dripped like venom. Keller chuckled again, glancing at Jasmine as if daring her to speak out of turn. The oppressive silence that followed made the night feel heavier, every rustle of leaves or distant car horn amplified in Jasmine's mind. Then, her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, and she felt a pang of relief. It wasn't a call she could answer, but it reminded her of the outside world, beyond these officers' intimidation. Holloway straightened, his eyes narrowing as he finally faced her again. "Do you know who we are?" he sneered, a thinly veiled threat in his words. Jasmine met his gaze steadily, her mind calculating her next move. She chose her words carefully, knowing that any slip could escalate the situation dangerously. "I do," she replied evenly, though inside she felt the adrenaline surge. Keller raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. Holloway's glare hardened, confusion flickering across his features for just a second. Jasmine realized in that instant that something had changed. Their perception of control, their assumption of power, was about to collide with a reality they hadn't anticipated. A secret she had carried with her all her life was about to surface, and with it, a reckoning that would shatter the illusion of authority these men thought they wielded effortlessly. The night air seemed to tighten around Jasmine as Holloway's voice cut sharply through the tension. "Do you have any idea who we could call if—" He stopped mid-sentence, his words faltering as a sudden realization hit him, mirrored in Keller's stunned expression. Jasmine's heart remained steady, though adrenaline coursed through her veins. She took a slow breath, stepping a fraction closer, her posture calm but deliberate. "Actually," she said, her voice controlled but firm, "you probably know my father." Holloway blinked, confused. "Your father?" he asked, his tone suddenly uncertain. Jasmine nodded, letting the words settle. "Daniel Thompson, police chief of this city. She paused, letting the implication hang in the humid night air. Keller stiffened, his smirk appearing as recognition flashed across his face. Holloway's flashlight trembled slightly in his hand, his face draining of color. "Wait, you're—" he stammered. Jasmine held his gaze evenly, her calm composure a sharp contrast to the shock radiating from the officers. "Yes," she said, her voice unyielding. "I'm his daughter, Jasmine Thompson." The words landed like a thunderclap, instantly shifting the dynamic between them. The sense of power Holloway and Keller had wielded moments before evaporated, replaced by a palpable, uneasy tension. Holloway stepped back, gripping the edge of the squad car for balance, while Keller's jaw tightened, as though trying to process the fact that the person they had belittled, threatened, and harassed was not only untouchable in their eyes, but connected to the very authority they were sworn to respect. Jasmine's pulse slowed slightly as she maintained her steady stance, every inch of her body radiating control and confidence. In the silence that followed, punctuated only by the hum of distant traffic and the faint rustle of leaves, the officers were forced to reckon with the reality that they had misjudged her entirely. The tables had turned in an instant, and Jasmine, who had entered this encounter bracing for danger, now stood in a position of undeniable power. The shock in their eyes mirrored the weight of their miscalculation, and in that moment, the truth of who she was became a force that could not be ignored or undone. Holloway's hands shook slightly as he lowered the flashlight, the beam wavering across Jasmine's composed face. Keller looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed they were in the middle of the deserted street, and his casual smirk had completely vanished. Jasmine stood still, every movement deliberate, her eyes locked on Holloway, silently conveying that any misstep now could be catastrophic. The night air felt heavier, charged with tension and disbelief as the officers scrambled mentally to process the situation. We didn't know," Holloway muttered, his voice cracking ever so slightly, a futile attempt at justification. Keller stammered, fumbling for words, his posture defensive, as if retreating could erase the embarrassment of moments ago. Jasmine's lips pressed together in a calm, almost serene line. "I'm sure you didn't," she said evenly, letting her words hang, controlled yet pointed. She could feel the adrenaline in her veins, but her exterior remained unshaken, the product of years of careful preparation and lessons learned from her father about handling authority, both as an officer's daughter and as a young Black woman navigating a world of bias. Holloway glanced at Keller, his eyes wide, betraying the realization that the power dynamic had flipped entirely in Jasmine's favor. "Chief Thompson will hear about this," Keller said finally, his voice hesitant, as though stating the obvious could somehow undo the moments of intimidation they had inflicted. Jasmine's expression softened ever so slightly, not in mercy but in measured control. "He already knows," she replied, a subtle edge of warning in her tone. The words cut through the night air like a knife, forcing the officers to absorb the full weight of the situation. Their bravado, which had seemed unshakable seconds before, crumbled into visible uncertainty. Jasmine could sense the shift, the fear, the embarrassment, the dawning awareness that their actions had consequences far beyond what they had anticipated. And in that moment, the deserted street became a stage where power, prejudice, and truth collided, with Jasmine standing firmly at the center, unshaken, commanding, and fully aware that the officer's perception of control was gone forever. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional hum of a distant car and the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Holloway's hands clenched the flashlight tighter, knuckles whitening, while Keller's eyes darted nervously between Jasmine and the squad car, as if searching for some invisible escape route. Jasmine's calm, measured breathing contrasted sharply with the officer's obvious unease. "I suggest you call the station," she said, her voice steady but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Let your superiors know who you've been harassing tonight." Keller swallowed hard, fumbling for his radio, but his fingers trembled, betraying the panic he tried to hide. Holloway shook his head, muttering under his breath, "This can't be happening." Jasmine's eyes never left his, unwavering, her presence a quiet, unyielding force. She took a step closer, the streetlight catching the determination in her face. "You think this is a joke? That I am just another black girl on the road? You're about to learn how seriously my father and I take this." Keller's voice cracked as he finally keyed the radio, his words rushed and anxious. "Unit 47, request immediate guidance. We have a situation. Traffic stop." Holloway cursed under his breath, realizing the severity of their miscalculation. Jasmine stood silently, letting the weight of her presence and her words sink in. The officer's earlier confidence, the smugness they had wielded like a weapon, was gone entirely, replaced with fear, confusion, and the dawning understanding that their actions had not only been morally wrong, but professionally disastrous. Jasmine's mind raced, calculating every possible outcome, yet her face remained composed. She had been trained by her father to handle situations like this with precision. No overreaction, no hint of anger, just measured control. And as the minutes stretched on, with the faint static of radio chatter filling the air, Jasmine realized that tonight the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The officers who had believed they dictated the terms of the encounter were now fully at her mercy, and the realization settled in like a heavy weight over the deserted street. The low rumble of additional squad cars grew louder, piercing the quiet night and signaling that Holloway and Keller's desperation had triggered an inevitable chain reaction. Jasmine remained still, hands relaxed at her sides, exuding a calm confidence that only intensified the officer's panic. Within minutes, Sergeant Laura Mitchell arrived, stepping out of her vehicle with a purposeful stride, her eyes quickly assessing the scene. "What's going on here?" she asked sharply, her voice authoritative, cutting through the tension like a knife. Holloway opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find words, his earlier bravado now completely gone. Keller muttered something incoherent under his breath, shaking his head. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. She knew Mitchell wouldn't tolerate any misconduct, and the sergeant's presence provided an invisible shield that amplified her control. "These officers stopped me," Jasmine said evenly, her tone measured but firm, "and harassed me without cause. I'm Jasmine Thompson, Police Chief Daniel Thompson's daughter. I expect this situation to be handled immediately." Mitchell's eyes widened slightly, registering the gravity of the revelation before narrowing into a hard, professional stare directed at Holloway and Keller. "Step aside," she ordered, and both officers hesitated, their minds racing to salvage the mess they had created. Jasmine allowed a brief, controlled exhale. She knew this was the moment to assert her position without overstepping. Let her identity do the work. Let the authority of the law reinforce the lesson already unfolding. Holloway's gaze flicked toward Jasmine, panic clear, while Keller's jaw tightened in silent frustration. The street felt charged with tension, every distant light casting elongated shadows over the scene. As Mitchell radioed in to notify the station and request internal affairs oversight, Jasmine stood tall, her posture calm but commanding. The officers' faces betrayed the full weight of their misjudgment, and for the first time that night, Jasmine felt a flicker of relief, not because the ordeal was over, but because the scales had finally begun to tip in her favor. The city's streets, dark and unforgiving just minutes ago, now felt like a stage where justice and accountability were quietly, inevitably asserting themselves, with Jasmine at the center, unshaken, resolute, and fully aware of the power her identity carried. By the time Captain Robert Hayes arrived, the air was thick with a mixture of tension, embarrassment, and a quiet sense of inevitability. Holloway and Keller stood awkwardly beside their squad car, the earlier arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by apprehension and shame. Jasmine remained poised, her hands at her sides, voice calm but commanding as she recounted the events with clarity and precision. "They pulled me over without cause," she said, looking each officer directly in the eye. "Their harassment was unprovoked, and it escalated unnecessarily until my identity was revealed." Captain Hayes listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally glancing at Mitchell for confirmation. Holloway attempted to speak, but his voice faltered, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Keller shifted uneasily, mumbling half-hearted excuses that only highlighted the depth of their misjudgment. Jasmine didn't flinch. Every word, every movement was deliberate, a reflection of the years of preparation and composure instilled in her by her father. Mitchell interjected, her tone firm. "Both officers will be held accountable. Internal Affairs has been notified and will review all actions taken during this stop." Holloway's shoulders slumped, and Keller's face went pale. Jasmine's eyes flicked toward them briefly, a steady reminder that their assumptions about power, authority, and race had been fundamentally flawed. The flashing lights of additional squad cars reflected off the wet asphalt, creating a surreal backdrop as the reality of the officer's misconduct settled in. In that moment, Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, relief, and an acute awareness of the systemic issues she had narrowly navigated. Hayes's presence and Mitchell's intervention reinforced that the law, when properly applied, could hold even those sworn to enforce it accountable. Jasmine's composure remained unbroken, and the officers, now fully aware of the consequences of their actions, could only absorb the enormity of their mistakes. The street, once a stage for intimidation and fear, had transformed into a scene of confrontation, authority, and undeniable justice, with Jasmine standing firmly at the center, unshaken, aware, and fully in control of the narrative that had unfolded. By the time the Internal Affairs team arrived, Holloway and Keller were visibly rattled, their earlier bravado completely stripped away, replaced by a combination of fear, shame, and disbelief. Sergeant Mitchell briefed them quietly, her tone firm but professional, as Jasmine watched with measured patience. Captain Hayes, standing nearby, confirmed that a full investigation would be launched immediately, and any further misconduct would carry severe consequences. Holloway's attempts at justification fell flat. Every excuse, every defensive gesture only highlighted the depth of their misjudgment and the recklessness of their actions. Keller's silence was nearly complete, broken only by nervous glances toward his partner, both officers fully aware that their professional careers, reputations, and credibility were at risk. Jasmine remained calm, every detail of her posture, expression, and voice reflecting control, authority, and unwavering composure. When the officers were instructed to submit written statements, their hesitancy made it clear they had finally internalized the gravity of the situation, and the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Jasmine's father, Chief Daniel Thompson, arrived shortly thereafter, his presence commanding immediate respect. He exchanged a brief, approving glance with his daughter, acknowledging both her courage and her composure. The officers stood silently as the chief addressed them, his tone measured but unmistakably authoritative, reinforcing that accountability was not optional and that their actions had consequences far beyond the immediate traffic stop. Jasmine, observing from a few steps back, felt a mix of vindication and quiet resolve. The night air, once heavy with fear and tension, now carried a different weight, the weight of justice, awareness, and lessons learned the hard way. As the officers were escorted toward their vehicles, radio chatter filling the empty streets, Jasmine felt the gravity of the moment settle fully upon her. The ordeal had been harrowing, the fear real, but the outcome reinforced a truth she had long known. Composure, courage, and identity could shift even the most dangerous situations, holding power accountable in ways that could never be ignored. Standing under the dim glow of the streetlights, Jasmine breathed deeply, the night silent except for the distant hum of traffic, knowing that while the encounter was over, the impact of her presence, her words, and her identity would resonate far beyond this single traffic stop.